Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming out tonight. I don't know how many of you have been out since COVID lifted, but hopefully this is not too weird being around a bunch of other people. I just came in from California, and for me, travel again has been quite awkward. But yeah, so I'm going to talk a bit about my show here, where I've come from, some of my ideas, and hopefully it'll be informative along the way. So the show I have here is called AI Amazing. I'll get a bit into that title later. The first point I want to make is human beings are a technological species. A lot of people think of technology as something that's kind of separate from us, but if you think about it, it's co-evolved with us ever since the first humanoid started using tools. That's really shaped our way of being. So if you start looking at technology as something that's as human as we are, it provides an interesting viewpoint. So I'm going to go through a few milestones of technology that I think are pretty important. So yeah, the oldest found stone tool is about 1.8 million years old. So this is about the time that we started inventing things that we can use to make our life easier, so we can spend more time doing other things. The second milestone is the Twinkie. That was invented 91 years ago. And this is quite interesting, industrialized food, things of that sort. It's just, something we didn't see up to that point. So I think that's quite important, actually. And about a year ago, this is Google's DeepMind protein folding AI. Protein folding was a very difficult problem for scientists to crack, even with traditional mathematical modeling, but deep learning and machine learning seems to have cracked some of those codes, and that's really something new that we haven't really seen before. So for me, this is kind of the beginning to the Industrial Revolution, to something new that's kind of an intelligence revolution. We started with physical amplification, then we turned that into physical automation. Now we have intelligence amplification, and next we're going to move from physical automation to intelligence automation. So we're going to see a shift in what it means to be human, much more than the Industrial Revolution did for us. And if you know your history, that created quite a big change. We're going to be automating beyond human ability, which I think is going to be quite interesting. So anyway, enough about the Twinkies. Getting into my artwork investigates the human's relationship with algorithms, automation, amplification, other types of technology. I'm always on the lookout for new tech that's coming out. My background is or education's in applied math and robotics, but I've been an artist for over a decade now. I do it to engage the public in complex ideas and technology in an approachable way. And the tools that I use are experimentation and prototyping, absurdity and humor, and mischief and play. I think those things all together create a way to engage people in artwork and technology. Like things to be funny, and I also like to play and build things and try new things. So I started out with robotics. And that started about, 11 years ago, I would say, 11 or 13 years ago. I made social robotics as part of my thesis work at MIT. And I was looking into how people formed relationships with robots. And I built a robot documentary filmmaker called Boxy. And Boxy roamed around, and it asked people questions, and it tried to get them to help it. But by being cute and mobile, people started to open up to it. So we got a video here.
I'm going to ask you some questions. Who do you love most in the world?
My mom.
I love my mom.
My wife.
What will people remember you for?
So you get an idea of the voice. It's very cute. It's got a childlike voice to disarm people, and people would open up to the robot. So what I'm about to show you are a few raw clips from a robot called the Blab Droid that we had going around New York City for the Tribeca Film Festival. And yeah, these are actual clips of people answering the robot questions. Keep in mind, they're in the middle of a street in New York talking to a cardboard box, basically.
You could give someone any gift, what would it be?
Give my mother the gift of not worrying about me before she dies. And she wants me to lose like a ton of weight and get really, really healthy. And she needs to see that before she dies for her to feel like I'm gonna be okay when she's not here. And I wish I could give her that, and I'm not positive I can. You asked.
If you died tomorrow, what would you regret the most?
I switched out her shampoo for a Nair hair remover when she wasn't looking, and clumps of her hair fell out.
So you get kind of the idea. The robots would actually tell people they were recording them, and even for the film festival that some of them were attending, but even so, they would go into a corner and start talking to it and say, I got to tell you something, even though it had cameras for eyes. So I found that quite interesting, intriguing, disturbing on some levels. So that was kind of the start of a lot of my recent investigations. And later I found out some people from a certain company came to the lab at some point and got inspiration for a certain movie, which is always great to see your research out there. But anyway, yeah, over the years I sort of played with other ideas for robotics, things that are, I guess you'd sort of consider interactive or kinetic sculpture. So one was to finally make a robot that broke Asimov's first law, which if you don't know, a robot can't hurt or injure a person, which also if you've seen the movies, you know how that falls apart. So I just made a robot basically to go ahead and do that. So it's a robot that pulls exactly one drop of blood from you. So it's like the minimal definition of hurting a human. So basically an interaction to get past that discourse, which no longer was quite useful. Making robots to dispense pleasure.
I thought, ooh, this is good.
Like that?
Oh my god. Oh, okay. I want one of these. Down to the left. Come on.
So I'll pause at that guy's face. I think it says it all. That robot actually has been traveling around in a museum show. It was in the V&A at some point. Yeah, and museum patrons on their tours could get that. So basically what I wanted to do with that machine is get people to experience the future of what robots and intimacy might be like. But I sort of had to question what could an intimate interaction look like in a museum or gallery that wouldn't be obscene. Yeah, then I thought, yeah, what if robots also derived pleasure from doing their own work and just made people feel awkward and uncomfortable? So you get the idea. This was placed in very, very quiet places. I always love to see people's reaction with that. That was also pre-COVID, so that'd be a fun one to do. Yeah, and asking questions like, we're automating a lot of things, a lot of types of art and music and things of that sort. So I want to ask the question like, what would it be like if you automated fun? Why, you could do it, but is it necessary? So I built all these toy robots that were up all along a wall for a show, and they all played with various toys that you as a viewer could not touch and play with yourself. Each had their own personality, but all the robots were identical, quite like this one. That one could get annoying after a little while. Yeah, and also making machines that just do things like create beauty. No other reason than just to be there and produce. So I want to put a whole bunch of those in Turbine Hall if anyone has a connection. That'd be kind of fun. So moving on from robotics to algorithms and generation and generative things. I've been interested in things like augmenting human output and using speech-to-text systems. So this was a room I built for my show in LA where you can say any color you can think of into the microphone, and the entire room will turn that color.
Hot pink. Lime green. Cadmium red. Aqua blue. Orange. Hot pink. Canary
And yeah, about a year ago, I started working with a dancer who was augmented with sensors. And as she was performing on stage, there were robots around her making various types of artwork. Lots of fun output like paint and drawing, and then she would control music and the lighting on stage. It was quite interesting. All the way to algorithmic art, which is sort of more digital and generative. So these are a couple tapestries I had at Gazelli's last show about text. These are jacquard loom woven outputs from code. And on the left and right, you can see these wall tags, and these wall tags contain the HTML web page code that create the output here. So you can scan the QR code and basically take the digital artwork home with you. This is a 24-foot version I just did at Facebook's new headquarters in California for a permanent public art installation. And on the top is a jacquard loom woven QR code, which also contains the code for a infinite generative artwork that you can view on your phone. And a few other new ones I just had a couple weeks ago. These are quite big, and yeah, these squares are about the size of my pinky, so you can see how much detail you actually can get out of the weaving. It's quite incredible. You can fit megapixels of information in there, which is quite cool. And then, of course, NFTs, which have become quite popular. So I've been playing around with some of the ideas there, and what it means to have something that's digital. So anything from trying to make the NFT itself, not the artwork, until you do something with it, do something kind of fun, to things like fractals, which are generated from body signals that I had, to AI outputs, and other types of generative art. Yeah, so that's kind of my history up to the point of machine learning and AI. I've started with machine learning and deep learning, I think maybe 2-3 years ago, when things like Deep Dream came out, and some of the technology became more accessible. One of the early things I did was feed in audiobooks that celebrities were reading and created models based on the sound of their voices. And then I used those models to create new speech, but I didn't tell the models to create English or anything. So it creates gibberish in the style of their voice, which to me is just incredible. So you'll get an idea once you hear them. It'll make a lot more sense. I changed the names to protect the innocent.
Work it out and move it out. It is something
He's my favorite because you can really hear how British comes through there, at least to my ear. And yeah, those experiments led to probably my most viral work, which used Deep Dream along with these wavenets and a few different types of generative output. I'll play a bit of that here. There's a bunch more that you can watch online at night in the dark, if you please. Yeah, and like the voices that came out without any real English data, I was quite interested in how these machines were kind of simulating some of the feel of language and output and humans. So here's a page with a bunch of writing, but none of this is actually writing. Like the voices, it was a neural net trained on the shape of writing without actually any information on what English means or what words mean or what letters mean. I'll zoom in a bit. Again, you can kind of see letters come out because it learned those shapes, but there's actually no language in there. And this was all done completely with a robot. They used different pens. Found it quite interesting to make that input and output loop. And yeah, some more fun stuff. So a couple of years ago, I fed in the entire TED transcript database into another machine learning algorithm, and it generated a TED Talk, which I then did on the stage of TEDx San Francisco, wearing a robotic mask.
$5 can save planet Earth. This is a photograph from the human life and death spiral of negativity. I'm an ornithologist specializing in thought leaders, and I've been obsessed with trying to arrange time in a deep synergy. I started an incredible amount of damage. Human beings are the weapons of mass destruction. But then we cut the cables. You will see it if they were killing, poaching, hunting the healthcare workers. But the truth is irrelevant. Now that's the theory of everything.
So you can watch the whole talk online on the TED YouTube channel if they haven't taken it down by now. And yeah, another fun neural net. I fed in a ton of fortune cookie fortunes. Then it generated new fortunes from that. And I curated the ones I liked and I turned them into posters. So here are a few of those. Your dreams are worth your best pants when you wish you'd given love a chance. The expanse of your thoughts, they may never happen. The first man gets the oyster, the second mouse gets the cheese. Your pain is the essence of everything and the value of nothing. It could be your stupidity. Success is a powerful excuse. Love is like a veil, and I am a bad situation. Those made me laugh. I quite liked the seeming creativity that came out of there. Obviously, a lot of garbage came out of this as well, so these are highly curated. But the times that it makes hits are quite the hits. I was also interested in connecting myself into AI systems and trying to figure out how to have a bit of a collaboration with some of these generative outputs. So I did a series with paintings where I hooked up different body sensors, everything from EEG, reading my brain waves, to eventually gaze to see where I'm looking on a screen. I'll show an example of how that selection works. It'll be a bit clearer. But here are the steps that I went through for these paintings. Firstly, an AI combines different words together to generate an image of what it thinks those words look like. That sounds quite abstract, so I'll show an example of that later. And then it produces variants of those images by bringing them together and creating different child images. Another AI shows me several of those child images, measuring my body signals, and then narrowing down onto an image that it thinks I like best. Those steps are repeated over and over till it gets to an optimal image. Images are upscaled using an AI to a higher resolution. The result is sent to be painted by painters in a Chinese painting village. And finally, AI looks at the image, tries to figure out what the heck it is, and makes a title for it. So here is a sped up and simplified version of what the interface looks like that I see. The red circle is where I'm looking. Obviously, you can't see the sort of headset that I'm wearing to read my brain waves, but you'll see how the images start narrowing down towards a final one. This is a GAN that makes faces, so an AI that generates, outputs. There we go. So as I'm looking around, it's weighting the places where I look, giving them different scores. The one in the middle is the winner from the last round. They'll start getting more and more cohesive in their attributes. Again, this is quite a bit sped up as well. And then it'll end on a final one. And here's an example of the words that it turns into an image. So this is a generative algorithm called BigGAN. And this particular image comes from combining a comic book, a cabbage, and a butterfly. This used the backend called GANBreeder at the time. Now it's called ArtBreeder, run by Joel Simon. He's actually one of our residents at residency I'm at in Berkeley. Yeah, so you can go online. You actually can try this yourself. He's got a really great, easy interface for people to do it now. And back then I was in the beta, so I was basically connected through Joel using an API into his generation. So here are a few of the paintings that are here. This one is a mix of a dog and a flower and other things. And the captioning AI decided that this would be called a brown and white dog sitting in the grass holding a frisbee in its mouth. This is actually from an earlier GAN called Attention GAN, which was before GANBreeder and all that sort of stuff. They're quite more abstract, but I quite like them. It says, this is a bunch of different types of scissors on a table. Sure. This is a kind of a fluffy dog. It's a bit more normal than most of them. A brown and white dog laying on top of a couch. You can definitely see this one. I really like this one because it's one of those AI generations where you're kind of like, I can kind of make something out, but I'm not quite sure. I think it's pretty awesome. And yeah, the AI was also not sure, so it just said it's a bunch of items that are in display in a store, which I guess is about as generic as you can get. And back to this one, which is said it's a group of people riding on the back of a motorcycle, which I mean, you can kind of see. So all this leads up to my newest work and the stuff that I was doing during the pandemic mostly. So I got early access to a AI API called GPT-3. And GPT-3 is a AI which generates text. And right now it's one of the most complex AIs that's out there because it was trained on millions and millions of web pages. So the types of knowledge it has is unbelievable. So I worked with that and something called GPT-2, which is another one that they actually released out to the public. And like the paintings, I go through kind of this step-by-step process with it. So I go into the AI and I give it a start text. So what the AI does is you give it a text and it does its best to complete it. Like if you said like, you know, would be a good example. The 45th president is X. It'll come up with the right answer. But if you give it things that are a bit more abstract, it'll start kind of making things up, which is where things get interesting. So for these works, the description text, titles, and quotes for the artworks are generated from these start texts. So I give the machine these start texts, and it tries to complete them. I curate the output that I like the best after going back and forth in and out with it. And these are all me asking the AI to produce descriptions of artworks like you would see on a wall label in a museum. When an output is generated that I like, I feed it back into the system and it generates more text. So it's this kind of back and forth, this collaboration, this curation as well. This machine-human loop is repeated until I choose the final output. Again, there's a lot of curation involved here. If a name isn't included in the description, a fake name is generated from a neural net I trained on names. Same thing with birth date, location. Again, things you'd see on a wall label. Punctuation and tweaks and sort of things like that are done afterwards. And then I take that AI described artwork and then I produce it in real life. So I take the thing that the AI imagined, has no imagination though, and I create it. This was really fun to do during COVID, stuck in my studio by myself. It was like having this kind of virtual collaborator telling me to do weird and wacky things. So it was quite fun. One of the first outputs it described was this, beautiful sculpture. And I'll read the description that was described by, that was produced by the AI. The sculpture contains a plunger, a toilet plunger, a plunger, a plunger, a plunger, and a plunger, each of which has been modified. The first plunger is simply a normal plunger, but the rest represent a series of plungers with more and more of the handle removed until just the rubber cup is left. The title of the artwork is A Short History of Plungers and Other Things That Go Plunge in the Night, by the artist known as the Plungers, whose identity remains unknown, and it was first exhibited in the Museum of Modern Art in New York City in 1973. Again, this is all a fiction made up. Then it goes on to explain that the Plungers were a collective of anonymous artists, and they created they founded a movement called Plungerism, and it was about the conceptualization and promotion of a new art form called Plungism. That is a state of mind wherein the mind of an artist is in a state of flux and able to be influenced by all things, even plungers. So it's all self-referential and crazy. And again, this is all made by a machine. But I do want to stress the fact that this output is curated, so not all the outputs are this good. And I'll show you what a sort of back and forth, a typical back and forth between me and the machine looks like. So this is a bit simplified for explanation here. So it'll create a beginning output, which here is in slightly more bold and less bold. Something like, the sculpture consists of zip ties attached to the links, a nearly 100-foot chain hung across a room, on the floor, or from hooks on a wall. The zip ties alternate color from orange to black, and the chain is colored silver. So then that could be fed back into the system to ask it to generate more text, so it could continue. The sculpture is a commentary on the growing influence on technology and its effect on the environment. The zip ties are plastic, which is a man-made substance that is used to create plastic products, which seems to be self-evident. Or it could continue. The sculpture is a commentary on the restraints of modern society put on the human soul by limiting our creativity, free will, and individuality. Or the color orange symbolizes the radioactive contamination of uranium, which means to create nuclear energy and ultimately the nuclear bomb. The color black signifies death, decay, the loss of substance, and the resulting void or hole in existence. So again, those are three different outputs that the same system made, which I found pretty incredible, laughing alone in my studio in sweatpants playing with the system. Yeah, I just went on to make a whole bunch of works with this back and forth. So here's one that's behind me here. And I'll read the description. The sculpture consists of toothpicks stuck in a canvas. The toothpicks are dipped in beeswax, giving them a golden color. The artwork is a commentary on the plight of bees, and the canvas represents the beehive during colony collapse disorder. in which the bees simply disappear from the hive, leaving the queen bee behind in an empty space. And it goes on to describe how the sculpture is a form of activism about bee colonies, and the title it came up with was The Final Resting Place of the Queen Bee. A couple other inputs. There's another one. The sculpture consists of a flip clock, which is scrambled like a bad dream. It sits upon an empty can of stew that the artist ate because it was time for dinner, and she was hungry. The scrambled clock suggests that the artist has become lost in time, that she has no sense of what time is and where it is. The fact that she ate the stew in order to stay alive indicates the artist is physically trapped and has no way to escape. Many have speculated about the meaning of the particular can of stew that the artist has chosen to use as a pedestal. And it goes on to talk about how Hormel Dinty Moore soup has no preservatives, which is a statement about the artist's inability to create due to the presence of inauthentic art in the world. Quite dramatic. This was another early one that I did, which was a collage. This collage consists of pieces of artworks cut out from the magazine Art Forum. In the center is the cover ripped from the book All I Really Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. The book cover is representative of the common criticism, "My kid could paint that." The work is a response to the critical, jaded, and sometimes monotonous art world. Then it goes on to quote from a non-existent artist. You can see all the bits and bobs cut out from Art Forum there. This artwork is made from a poorly painted reproduction of a famous Chinese artist's work, which has been cut up and glued to a panel. The pieces are rearranged to form a new composition that is similar but different. And it goes on to talk about how the artist's process of fragmentation and rearrangement is fairly common in pop art. So it goes back and kind of re-relates this to art history. It comes up with citations sometimes for other artworks that actually exist. Obviously, things that are more popular tend to appear more in the data set. And this one's really fun because it needs to be taken down and rearranged every time it's installed, and it's a huge sculpture. This sculpture is like a child's building toy made giant. The interlocking pieces are made of high-density polyethylene and fit together like a puzzle. The sculpture is meant to be changed, with the pieces rearranged at each exhibition. And again, it goes on to describe why the title is called Permanent Temporary, and it's about how the artist heard a quote from his father. And again, it just goes on to build these sorts of fictions. So anyway, a bunch of these are downstairs, and you could read the full wall labels yourself. There are a whole bunch more that I made back home. I also thought it'd be interesting to give some of the outputs to people who are skilled in art output that I can't make myself. So it's like me collaborating with the machine, then sort of machine collaborating through me with another person, which I found quite interesting. So these are the stairs that lead down to the exhibition, and this is the AI describing a work of graffiti. And this work in the style of street art, the words graffiti appear in block capitals, which are offset by the curving scrolled letters of art against the background. The work is signed by the artist Moist, born Paul York, which is known to have painted in the area. Then it goes on to talk about how this was first made in a place called the Triangle in the UK. I don't know, maybe this place actually exists. And how this was a response to police cracking down on graffiti in the area. Again, this is a complete fiction. And there were a few, whoops, let's go back. There were a few of these different prompts that I gave to the graffiti artist to make some sketches, and these are others that are out there. Also particularly like Luxury Enema. I think that one's quite great. This is one that was done by a friend back home in Boston that he eventually painted in the back of my studio as well. These are quite fun because I'm basically using the skill set of someone who's a real expert in their field, and they interpret that text quite different than I do because they're like technical terms in there that I don't know about graffiti, and then they can imagine in their own minds what the output might look like. Also give it to some unskilled people. So this was one described as this artwork was created by a 5-year-old child. The image depicts a house or maybe a boat or maybe a house on a boat It is unclear exactly what the image is, but it is clear that this child has an imagination and is inspired by their environment. And this was done by a local kid who is almost 5 years old, so nearly counts. The funny thing I thought the AI did here was that it made a quote from the kid, but it wrote it like a kid would say it, so let me read it out. I'm going to build a boat for the moon to come on, and then the moon will come on the boat, and it will stop making the rain, and the rain will stop. And it will be so bright, and the moon will shine really, really, really bright, and I will go to sleep, and it will be nice. So that's the quote the AI made that a 5-year-old would say in the voice of a 5-year-old, which just blows my mind. Yeah, this was a description for a sketch I gave to my friend Fish, who used to do all the drawing for Guitar Hero and things of that sort. And it says, the drawing just depicts a figure that is part bear, part man, and part machine. It is a creature with a metal plate in its head, and it has 4 fingers. It is made from the imagination, but it is real. Yeah, so I've been really loving doing this sort of collaboration with other people as well, and seeing how their imaginations take place. I'd really love to also give the same prompt to multiple people and see how different people come out with what they interpret it as. Yeah, so finally, I've also been playing around with this thing called Clip, which takes text and turns it into an image. So I trained another neural net on art titles. So I fed in a whole ton of art titles, like the Fortunes. I asked it to come up with new art titles. Then I fed those art titles into the system, and then it makes images of what it thinks those titles are. So this one was the grotesquerie of beauty, and that's what it came up with. Kind of see bits of that in there. And here's another example. And that one was a cross-section of the last human. As you can kind of see, it's kind of meaty and bony and kind of filled with people. Anyway, to me, the type of imagination that I've been seeing from these machines, again, I say imagination in quotes, is quite incredible. And I think we're really on the cusp of seeing automation and just technology do things that we've never really imagined before. And a lot of people's minds go to things like Terminator or whatever. I think that's kind of obvious and boring, in so much that maybe the more important questions are do we want to automate art making or automate fun? Do we want to keep some things humans or not? Are we going to slowly lose the things that we enjoy because everything's so homogenized or made for us? I mean, you can imagine a future where your Spotify generates music on the fly for something you like, so no 2 people are hearing the same song. Do we lose anything there that we also gain? I'm pretty optimistic about the future in general. In a lot of these works, as you can see, I kind of try to stay neutral, or let people decide which way things go. Try to be playful and humorous to keep things approachable. And I think that's also where art is very powerful, because it's a medium where you really can have a type of physical or applied philosophy. People can come up with their own meaning. When you sit down with that robot that's touching you in an intimate way and tickling you, you could have an opinion about what interfacing with robots and being intimate with robots are like, but if you have that visceral feeling with a machine, you leave that experience really having a different understanding of what that might mean. And I hope a lot of this artwork does that sort of thing. Yeah, in conclusion, the title of the show is AI Amazing, and this title was also created by an AI. So I just wanted to share some of the other potential titles that it came out with. It came out with emojis. One was robot emoji, pain emoji, heart, laugh emoji with crying. I don't know. I don't quite know what it means, but it means something. Who cares? I won't be around to see it. The end of the world. I can't believe it's not human. Art and robots. Invisible reward. I don't quite know what that means. I, who was born from a computer, think about what is human, which I know could be deep if you don't think about it too much. And I'll end with a quote. I hope this project will help people see that AI is still at its very earliest stages of developing a sense of creativity. I want people to understand that AI is still very much a tool that helps humans make decisions rather than being a replacement for human creativity. This quote was also written by an AI. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone.
I think, Alex, if you are okay with it, we can open it up to some questions for about 10 or so minutes.
Sure.
And then you guys can enjoy the exhibition, which is downstairs. Please do check it out, and we're here to talk to you anytime. I think we have one from our
Zoom.
participants
Oh, sure, yeah.
already, if that's okay. So it's a question from Kitty, and she's asking, which organizations or individuals would you be most interested to partner with in creating work?
Hi, Kitty. Kitty's from Facebook, actually, Facebook Open Arts. Partnering with companies is great, both from just a plain, getting support to make artwork, but also getting access to like technology and knowledge is also really good. When I got access to OpenAI and GPT pretty early, I also was able to have a back and forth dialogue and share things with them, and then they would share artwork internally and give me feedback. So getting access to these tools and systems, which I may not have access to as an artist, but I can do creative or interesting things with, is always of interest. Yeah.
One of the biggest concern about our new technology, artificial intelligence or robotics or anything, is that once it is amalgamated into a day-to-day life, what would it do? Where will we be? How will we interact? At the moment, when you think of robotics, mostly you think about factories making cars and other parts and stuff like that. It hasn't touched us as it were. And artwork and other things that you have shown, it hasn't touched us. How do you see when the interaction starts coming into our day-to-day life? When it will happen, how we are going to react to that?
Yeah, I would say the public's perception of what a robot is really drawn by things by Terminator or movies, but your washing machine and your dishwasher are both robots. We don't find those too weird, so they already have interface into our lives. Just regular old cruise control is pretty much robotics, even without getting into self-driving cars. So these are things that we've had interactions with. You might think of them more as, again, automation or like making things easier or doing things easier. Robotics in themselves right now are, usually the types of robotics you're thinking about are usually kind of expensive. So really it's about costs going down. I think machine learning and artificial intelligence are the things that are going to come a lot faster because those are all done in the cloud and are going to interface with your social media or your daily life. Self-driving cars might still actually be quite a bit far away, especially navigating things like this. On highways, they're great. Like having some humanoid robot in your house. I mean, Elon Musk just announced something, but I think that's going to be quite far away before anything like that comes out. I think most of the robots we're going to see are going to be very specialized to particular tasks. Like you'll find a burger flipping robot or a fry making robot or those pizza. Look at Japan and their pizza vending machines. Those are basically robots, but they're just you don't see them because they're in boxes. So I would just say the perception of robotics and what they are versus what popular media makes them out to be are quite different. So they're here already, and they're driven by capitalism because anything that can make anything cheaper and faster and make someone money is going to be incentivized for sure.
How do you see the art that you just showed and how it could translate into fake news era that we are living? I just saw today a video, I think it wasn't Tom Cruise, but it was Tom Cruise. And somebody made it up entirely different. So what do you think people's reaction to this kind of technology will be?
Yeah, deep fakes are a concern for sure, but I don't think we need AI to drive people's opinion. I think politicians do that very well without technology. So getting people to believe falsehoods, I mean, just look at the last year. So before we start worrying about AI, maybe we should just, first, if that problem is insolvable for other humans, by the time it gets to technology, there's no hope for solving it. So that's quite an issue. But yeah, not being able to believe our eyes, I mean, a state with enough money with a George Lucas type, special effects shop 5 years ago could probably also do something that would fool someone. So really the difference is now the amount of money and processing time and computing power has gone lower and lower. So now more people can do it. So I think that's really more of the concern. It's just more accessible. Yep.
You said that you're collaborating with the machine.
collaborating in big, you know. Yeah.
So I would like to ask you, what's the proportion of that collaboration? Because we can think of a sculptor collaborating with the tools
Sure.
of marble.
Yeah.
So that's great. But the sculptor's input would
Sure.
be probably quite great, maybe
Uh-huh.
even 100%, maybe 90%. And what's yours?
Yeah, so I'd say the difference between like a hammer and chisel and like GPT-3 is that the creative process is coming from the tool, right? Like your hammer and chisel is not making a decision where to put the nose. You're making that decision. It's just amplifying your force, which is why, you know, at the beginning I had those like, you know, amplification versus automation were kind of two different things. So the hammer and chisel are like, you know, that rock, and like an AI is more like that Twinkie. It's like the more, you know, refined form of that. So for me, the collaboration was like, you know, it spit out a lot of stuff. Much of it wasn't good. I picked out the ones that I liked the most. So what the machine needed from me was actually my brain and my like curatorial ability almost. So I wasn't giving it, you know, my creativity. I was pulling the creativity from it, but the choice was still mine. So, you know, the collaboration was more of a one-way type thing, I would say. But then you had that thing where you'd feed text in and you get more and more. So that was when the sort of back and forth happened.
But that's the moment. So can you envisage a time when humans will become just hosts for the machines? And
I'm not sure, like, I mean, like,
the dominance of the machine is going to be, will become redundant.
Yeah, I mean, there's two ways to look at the human becoming redundant. Either like we have reformed society so much that not everyone needs to work anymore to be like a human in society, or you got the dystopian that everyone's gonna be out of jobs and fighting, and then you'll have just the two. There'll just be a split in, you know, two groups of people that technology is gonna separate. Yeah, it's more of a human problem than a technology problem, because we could steer that either way, but I'm sure if you know the directions we go as humans, one is more likely than the other. Yeah. I think it's going to happen, you know, again, I don't see like a Terminator type future. I see like things happening very slowly and like just creeping in here and there, and we got to make decisions about them as they happen.
Oh, I think they'll come much quicker.
Yeah?
It's going to be good.
Yeah.
Have you worked with
Oh,
Bluetooth?
I just want to take some more questions. Yeah.
When you talked about the AI, you
Yeah.
said imagination.
Uh-huh.
So I'm assuming that you mean that humans have imagination.
Well, I was.
But I was duped downstairs. So I'm convinced that, people question that humans can have imagination anyway.
Yeah, sure.
So honestly, what do you, your AI collaborators,
Uh-huh.
how would you describe their imagination? Because I'm convinced.
So yeah, talking about what is or is not imagination starts moving into more of a philosophical type thing.
Imagination doesn't exist.
That's why I put those words that are more philosophical in quotes, because yeah, that's a whole rabbit hole. But you know, the question is like, is it just like parroting back patterns that it sees and creating something new? But then, is that what imagination is anyway? Like, do we just like make new output from things we've seen before? So.
But they iterate very simply.
Yeah, so the risk with anthropomorphizing machines is that you're putting human traits on them, which can be bad because they're not, right? But they might seem that way. So it causes misunderstanding from the public. It also causes issues and things like bias. There's all sorts of problems that can happen when you turn a machine into like an animal or human in your mind. So yeah, does it have imagination? It definitely has some creativity of some sort, you know, but imagination, I guess, sort of belies some sort of like mental process. So maybe it has something else, some other word that we don't have a word for it yet. But yeah, the thing with that system is, you know, I used it to make artwork outputs, but you can easily ask it to make a poem or the lyrics to a song or write a letter or whatever. It's so versatile that it's just kind of amazing. But it does have, you know, blind spots or certain things it can't do. So that's what happens with a lot of these systems. They're like really good in particular cases and then completely fail in other cases. So that's why we're not really anywhere close to general AI like you see in the movies. There's no like full thought, because even though this seems impressive, it's still a very thin like ability that this machine has. Yep.
Yeah. A lot of it, when I was watching, it reminded me of like Dado and Serena's work in photo montage that is already happening. How do you see this as different, in a way, to what the Dadaists were doing and what Surrealists were doing? And I know that the difference would be the political element would be different. But for this, there's no politics to it, is there? It's just playful, like you say.
Yeah, so I mean, you could easily move any of these ideas into a more, you could take a stance, you know, either way with them. You know, I like to leave it a bit more to the viewer to do that themselves. How is it different? I mean, it might not be. It could be very similar. So.
Could you make it political, depending on what you fed it?
I mean, you could make it political either way, just because I basically learned from the internet. So it has all the pluses and minuses that, you know, millions and millions of web pages and people writing on the internet has. So it has all the beauty and disgustingness of humans online, I guess is the answer. Yeah. Yep.
We have another question from our Zoom panelists.
Sure.
So Emily is asking, do you think machine-made art will eventually replace human-made art? A very existential question.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting question. So, you know, right now it can't make anything physical because it doesn't have a body. So there's kind of a barrier for physical art. But for things like digital art, sure, yeah, we're seeing like it's creating, like those faces I showed look like someone drew them, but they didn't. Those are all AI generated. You can play with them yourself at the Art Breeder website. It's, you know, a place where you can play with generating things. And you'll see how realistic some of the outputs are. So like if you wanted to create a character face right now, you probably can do, you know, as good as a person could. I'm sure we're gonna see things like AI is making music for commercials or for elevators or places where we just need a bunch of music just happening and it's going to sound as good as some other plain boring music. I think the question is more, when these machines do get that good, are we going to place any extra value on art made by a person versus a machine? Maybe or maybe not. It's more of a philosophical society question. Certainly art that's more commercial or art that's like, you know, like I said, appearing in advertisements or places where, you know, you just need to make a lot of it quickly. I think these systems are going to do that sort of thing. Yeah, so I think physical art right now is kind of safe just because there's kind of a firewall into physicality. But, you know, I don't see any reason that, you know, that won't happen in the foreseeable future. Yep.
I really like what I have to say. It's really funny.
Thank you.
And can I just follow along from his further questions? I think an important thing that you stressed or that you mentioned a few times is the fact that you chose lots of the artwork, so there was this human influence to kind of make sense of it and to create meaning.
Yeah.
The meaning came from you, whilst then the tool kind of made the artwork. So kind of following on from that question of at what point, if it ever would, and I guess on a kind of philosophical sense, the meaning and the symbolism of art and that's place kind of within society. Do you ever think that could be replicated by a machine in a real way?
Well, I mean, in a convincing way, not in a genuine way. I think there's a difference between will it fool someone versus does the machine actually think that? No, the machine would never really think that because, you know, it doesn't actually know that, you know, bee colony collapse disorder is important. So the justification I made for this artwork is completely plausible and actually makes sense. And, you know, if you were to read that, you'd be like, oh yeah, okay. But there's nothing really behind that at all. So yeah, the meaning in this is kind of meta. The meaning in this is the back and forth I did with the machine. That's what all these artworks are about. These artworks are not about what's on the wall label. That's all fiction. These artworks are about artificial intelligence, even though they're physical. But that's how it is now. You know, you get into sort of the philosophical debate, like can a machine ever have intention or a machine ever have like thoughts or you know, then you get to the point where, you know, if the machine is complex enough, if, say a machine had like more, you know, connections and neurons in a brain, like, are we gonna like, you know, draw some lines somewhere where it's so convincing and it seems so genuine that we really truly can't tell the difference? At that point, you know, does it matter that one is like human-made and one isn't? That's sort of going into the realm of sci-fi, I suppose. Yeah, and definitely philosophical thinking. Yeah. And I also don't claim to have the answers for a lot of this stuff. A lot of this stuff is so new. Like, it's just like getting people to think about this and ask these questions is really, a lot of the point to doing work like this.
Yeah, because if the meaning is coming from the viewer or it's coming from the creator, they're two completely different things.
Yeah.
It's your trying to create a question and we're connect to them.
Yeah. Like, you could go in a museum and not read the wall label, just look at an artwork and make your own judgment about what it's about without even knowing what the artist intended. Or you could sort of look, into their statement. Yeah.
Yeah, but sorry, the problem here is you were talking a lot about it's fictitious,
Mm-hmm.
and they make up names of artists who never existed.
Sure, yep.
That can be a bit of a problem. You go into a museum at the moment, you know that whether you like it or not, that was created by an artist.
Sure, yep.
Whether you like it or not.
Uh-huh.
Here, we don't know. They say it's an artist and it's fictitious,
Mm-hmm.
and with time, we won't tell difference whether it's fictitious or not.
Yeah.
We're talking about fake news, fictitious, and these are big words at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going more in that direction. Fiction, sci-fi, fictitious, fake news, rather than going back to maybe something very humble, very modest, very simple, but true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's philosophical.
Yeah, no, for sure, yeah.
I think that's why we go back to beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Do you like it?
Yeah.
That is the question.
Yeah, that's true.
One of the finest things that
whether it's an artist or not doesn't
no,
matter.
because one of the things that Royal Academy or someone they do, they have an exhibition of postcards that are done by a lot of people, and some of them are very good artists, but you do not know them. So you decide to buy just by looking at a picture or at an artwork, and then we come to the point of what is
I
fiction.
usually like to know whether something is real or not.
Nothing,
as long as I know.
Nothing is real.
Okay.
As
long as I know, that's fine. But I like to know the truth. And I'm a little bit worried that we'll get beyond that and get so confused we don't know what's true and what's not.
But it won't matter.
It might not matter.
It won't matter because our thoughts will get so homogenized. You mentioned the word homogenization. So we are already so conditioned by technology to see things in a certain way. So also free will and the fact that we choose or we don't choose is, I think we've passed that point. There is no return.
I think we're going to take one last question and then let everybody enjoy the exhibition. Anyone?
Okay, yep.
Did you see the exhibition by Bridget Riley, which is down the road?
Not yet. I got here and finished my presentations. This is like, I get to go out after this. Okay.
Bridget Riley,
Okay. Awesome.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.